The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 1151 Good News. While Lex teleported through Lover's Island, he had kept an eye out for anything valuable he might find. He had great expectations considering that it was a 4-star planet, and to an extent the planet lived up to his expectations. Every piece of dirt was precious, and every blade of grass could be treated like a natural treasure for low-leveled cultivators. A random pebble on the planet had more spirit energy than actual spirit stones from low-level planets. But for all its treasures, it fell short of actually enticing Lex. After all, no matter what he saw, he could find a better version back in the Midnight Realm. It was actually a little crazy to think about the fact that a realm which was limited to the nascent realm had better quality treasures than a planet that could support very high-level cultivators. But to be fair, the Midnight Realm was constantly growing, and all these valuable things would eventually become distributed over a very large area. But for now, he could still benefit from it. That was another reason why it was so important to ensure his guests stay within the confines of the inn. They'd strip the whole realm of all its treasures if they could. Regardless, he was getting sidetracked. Lex watched as Sim opened up the ceramic bottle and took a sniff, then froze. Is this the sap of a mythical tree? He asked, shocked. Maybe. See if the king likes it. If it does, I'm willing to trade for more feathers. The heavenly tree back in the Midnight Realm was thoroughly destroyed, in body and soul. Even its descendants had died, though that was a result of the tree's own actions rather than Lex. But soon after the tree died, another, similar tree seemed to appear out of thin air, and began growing quickly. In that case, could you please call them here? Do let them know that this is for a private matter, and is not unrelated. Sure, though I doubt that'll make a difference, she said. Just a few seconds later, Z teleported into Lex's study. The once skinny and frail teenager had now grown into a towering, muscular, well, technically speaking he was still a teenager since he was around 17 years old, whereas before he just looked like a teenager. Z was 6 feet 6 inches, 1.9 meters, and had forearms thicker than most people's thighs. Yet somehow, either due to his introverted nature or some other mystical reason, even with his great height and strong body, he did not look intimidating or overly powered. He still looked like someone you would find sitting in a gaming den, eating ramen late at night and watching anime. The big brother of the inn had truly grown big, and not just in height. After 15 years, Lex was not the only one who had grown strong, and honed his cultivation. Most had reached the nascent realm, and then further refined their cultivation. But Z, whether it was due to the special training he got at the Temple of Fasting, or the heritage he received, or due to his natural aptitude, had been on the verge of facing his tribulation to become an Earth immortal for a few years now. So naturally once the inn reopened back up to the universe, Z and a few others went to the temple. Actually, Luther, Gerard and Velma had gone there as well, but based on what Velma said they probably didn't end up facing their tribulations yet. Congratulations on becoming an Earth immortal, Lex said with a soft smile. I guess I should give you a promotion in the Gamers Denver. Z's expression froze. It seemed like no matter how far he got in life, he could not escape the reach of his boss. Chapter 1152 Kindling Dragonfire. Z froze, and Lex kept smiling at him. For a few moments they maintained this state, until eventually Lex chuckled. I guess you're going to be too busy to be working at the Gamer's Den from now on, huh? Maybe I should start looking for a replacement. For a moment, Z narrowed his eyes and looked at Lex. Since we're all working for the inn, shouldn't the person with the higher cultivation be running the shop? He asked, feeling Lex's cultivation level. Technically speaking, Z was the first original inn employee to become an immortal. Anita and Kawain didn't count. Oh, you're right. Lex exclaimed, agreeing too quickly. But I think your statement should be amended a bit. It's not the person with the highest cultivation level, but the strongest person who should be the boss. So, what do you say? Shall we have a small spar while we wait for the others? Winner gets to become the boss of the Gamers Denver. Z quickly looked down at the floor while taking a seat. Only a maniac would fight Lex. Z was now much stronger than he used to be, and with his tenets now allowing him to perceive the laws of the world, he could sense just how ridiculously strong Lex was. Instead of binding him and chaining him down, like laws did with literally everything in existence, the laws bent around Lex, as if his existence put a physical burden on something as abstract as the laws that governed reality. What's worse was that Z knew Lex was in this state because one of his seals was probably broken. Only when all of his seals were in place would he return to appearing like a normal human being. Of course, there was one more reason Z did not even remotely entertain the idea of trying to fight Lex. "There's a matter I want to consult you on," Z said. Over the past few years, Z had been very popular at the inn. He had always had a helpful personality and liked being of service to his coworkers as much as he could. It was one of the reasons why he was called the big brother of the inn. But when Z himself needed help, he usually turned to Lex, who had proved himself not only exceptionally powerful, but very knowledgeable. "Go ahead. We have some time before the others arrive, so if you have any problems adjusting to your new realm, feel free to ask." "It's not my new realm that's causing an issue, it's something else. You know that at the Temple of Fasting I accepted someone's heritage, right?" Now, though, he wasn't too sure. For example, ghosts really did exist, and they sometimes did look like people who used to live. But that was only because ghosts were formed from the leftovers of countless souls merging together. Technically speaking, wasn't that a form of life after death? "Can you block the memories?" Lex asked. "Yeah, it's pretty easy. But it requires me to consciously block them, otherwise as my cultivation grows, they will keep on being unlocked." "That's not a problem," Lex said simply. "You don't need to worry about Zarek, or anyone else, replacing you. However, I will caution you against viewing the memories. You yourself have only lived a few years. If you end up absorbing memories that span hundreds or even thousands of years, then there's a huge chance that you'll be heavily influenced by them and forget who you are. Take things slowly, and if you do ever want to unlock the memories, do it under supervision. After all, as a warrior king, I'm sure Zarek had a lot of unique experiences which could be beneficial for you to learn about. But only once you've grown up a bit." Z nodded, and put the thought behind him. As long as the innkeeper knew about this issue, nothing would happen. But more than that, Z had a feeling that even if a problem arose, just simply Lex would be enough to handle any issue. This new instinct was something he unlocked after he became an immortal, and even learned a bit about it. Apparently, instincts were like a hidden sixth sense that the human race had. All humans had them, but they needed to be trained to become effective. According to some of the memories he unlocked, Zarek's instincts were so strong that he could prevent his greatest enemies from ever even being born by anticipating who they would be born from. Z had learned a few other interesting things from those memories as well, but the most significant thing he learned was how to judge the danger someone represented. That was exactly why he knew that although Lex, sitting in front of him, seemed just as amicable and calm as always, he was dangerously furious underneath. Z sighed. It seemed like some people were going to die. Just as he had that thought, the remaining 3 people they were waiting for finally arrived. Gerard, Velma, and Luther walked in, seemingly in a good mood. Gerard and Velma were chatting amongst themselves, and Luther was also about to make some small talk, but when he looked towards Lex he sensed that something was amiss. Luther, who had thoroughly mastered the unique control his physique allowed over flames, could sense a fire burning inside of Lex, and it felt an awful lot like dragonfire. "Sorry for keeping you waiting," Luther said loudly, cutting the conversation between Gerard and Velma. "It's no trouble." "I didn't wait long," said Lex with a smile. "Since you're all here, I'll get right to the point. For the past few years, you've all been training your houses in their respective specializations. I have a small problem, and I think this could be the perfect opportunity to test out the houses of midnight." Chapter 1153 Every single one. The houses of midnight started out as an idea that Z had. When Harry changed his last name to Midnight, Z got the idea to take up a last name all the workers could take up, since not everyone might feel like they could do justice to such a name. So he took on the name Starcloak. The name was meant to represent the vast, night sky that could encompass countless stars, and was therefore meant for the masses to follow along. To a small degree, that is what happened. But largely, all the in-workers who had strange abilities which could not be categorized easily joined this family. One stellar example of this family was that guy whose ability it was to be forgotten. Although no one knew his first name, at least now they knew his last name. There was also Alfonso, who had weird powers that would change all the time, save for the ability to always have food in his pocket. Countless others had joined the Starcloak family, and took pride in how odd, or versatile depending on who you asked, their abilities were. Inspired by Z, Gerard also founded a family by the name of Umberguard. They were the protectors of the inn, the fighters, the warriors, the soldiers. Naturally, most of the security team and the Midnight Battalion joined this family. Velma decided that none of those suited her, so she formed the Nixhart family. It was supposed to be filled with romantics and gossip lovers, but it grew into something so much more. The most secretive, detailed and expansive information network was effortlessly conjured up by the Nixhart family, able to dig out even the deepest of secrets that no one wished to share. During the last 15 years, Lex had even tested this out by having them try to gather information from the various countries on Minara, and boy were they good. Last but not least was Luther, who formed the Nightshade family. This was the smallest family, but it was also the most lethal, even more than the Umberguard. The Nightshade family was not protectors, but killers. They were assassins, they were conspirators, they were the ones who would face the enemies of the inn and eliminate them. Their numbers were small, but that did not make them any less significant than the other houses. In fact, even John had decided to join the Nightshade house. Although he had left his assassin days behind him, his instincts were very much honed in on the profession, and the guidance he provided was without equal. Then there were his parents. They just had children with special physiques and decided to keep on having them until trouble came? Instead of letting the kids be born, and then hiding them the way they did with Lex, until they were strong enough, why couldn't they wait to have kids until they were strong enough to protect them in the first place? Even stupid people knew about using protection to avoid having unwanted children, so his parents, who were cultivators and were capable of achieving something no one else could, somehow lacked this bit of common sense? No, there was much more to this story than it appeared, and Lex would get to the bottom of it. Lex looked at everyone in the room, then began his explanation. Someone targeted my little sister, kidnapping her and then using her for their personal experiments, Lex said, skipping over the meat of the story. Although I have now rescued my sister, she is far from safe. In fact, she can't even come to the inn yet. There are still a few things I need to do before I can safely bring her to the inn, but while I do that, I need a bit of your help. I want to find the man responsible. But more importantly, I want to find everyone involved in this. Whether they were simple employees working for him, or some organization backing him from the shadows. I want to find them all. Recalling the immortals that had come and surrounded Yildirim, Lex did not think his grandfather's background was as simple as he made it out to be. When I go to mete out the punishment for this, I want every single person involved to feel it. Every single one. Silence filled the room after Lex spoke, as everyone absorbed the information Lex had just given. Chapter 1154. He is goading me. Velma cleared her throat, finally breaking the silence, before she asked a question. What can you tell me about this person? And anyone he might be working with? The more we know, the easier it'll be to find out exactly who or what we're looking for. Lex smiled. The man is my grandfather. His name, I believe, is Damien. I have some information, but I am about to get more in a short while. If you have any questions, think of them now. It'll help me find out exactly what I need to ask. In the meantime, let me give you the little information I have, and some of my own theories. Lex did not particularly want the details of his life being spread around, but in a matter directly related to his life it would be hard to avoid details. Even so, Lex stuck to the basics. He mentioned how his sister was taken away at a young age, kept away from everyone, and bonded to a planet to keep her trapped there, surviving only due to her unique ability that Lex strongly suspected his grandfather was coveting. He then mentioned the numerous assassins Moon faced, and how Lex suspected that they also worked for or with his grandfather. At this point, it was not just Lex who was angry. Every single person in the room was fuming. To say that over the past 15 years they had not become close would be a lie. Although they had managed to avoid any major conflicts, spending time together in peace was also a good way to get to know a person, especially since they had seen what he was like in a pinch. More than once had Lex faced danger head-on for them. Now, to learn that this entire time he had a sister who had been suffering. If it were up to Velma, they would have all left immediately. But they didn't. There was a reason why Lex called them even before he got all the details he wanted. It was so that they could summon their family members and begin planning out how they would deploy them. While they made these preparations, Lex would have a meeting with William. The last time Lex met him, William had tried to bring up the topic of his family. The fact that he had tried was the only reason Lex was even willing to meet with him again. William had claimed that he had some misunderstanding with his family, but at that time Lex had been too bitter and too angry to listen. Now though, things were different. He also wanted to know how complicit William had been during this entire process of kidnapping his siblings, though he highly suspected that this ancestor of his had no information of it when it was happening. He also wanted to learn about Liz and Belle. Moon did not know much, but William probably would. Lex nodded, and played the projection. Damien seemed upset at something, and then a monster appeared in front of him, out of nowhere. At first he did not react, but as they continued to have their conversation, Lex realized that this must have happened only a few days ago. In fact, it must have happened exactly on the day he rescued Moon. He thought nothing of the name Jeffrey, right up until Damien mentioned rescuing the monster from Earth, and then things began to click in his mind. Was Earth a political prison, or a convenient way for Damien to hide secrets? Jeffrey was the man who had orchestrated many wars and conflicts on Earth, just for his entertainment, and what he had been doing since his departure from Earth had not gone unnoticed. He was near the very top on the list of wanted beings in the Origin realm, and why wouldn't he be? As the foremost terrorist in the entire realm, targeting the entire realm itself, he was an enemy of the entire Hanali, and it seemed that he was one of his grandfather's partners. The scene ended right after Damien gave Jeffrey permission to hunt down his family, and disappeared through a portal, but Lex kept gazing at the place where the projection ended. It was not just you and your family he had been tricking. It was all of us. The damage he's done since leaving, he almost single-handedly destroyed the entire Williams family, and that's nothing compared to the damage he's done to the Jotun Empire. He meant for you to find this, Lex said simply. You're acting like a pawn in his hands. He wanted this found, and the reason he specifically mentioned me is because he anticipated you'd show it to me. He's goading me. William seemed surprised at Lex's deduction, but Lex did not seem goaded, or angered, or even irritated. He seemed perfectly calm. Lex finally looked away from the projection, and towards William. What can you tell me about my other sisters? He asked. Lex's mind was completely still. The more dire the situation was, the more comfortable he was. He was all too used to thriving in chaos, so by now, he no longer let his anger cloud his judgment. His priorities were straight. First he would rescue his sisters, and then he would kill. Chapter 1155 Anger Issues. The situation regarding your other sisters is not ideal, but it is nowhere near as bad as it is for Moon, William said as he rubbed his head. Lex could easily see that the man was not in good shape at all. He was most likely recovering from injuries, and was suffering some kind of spirit energy exhaustion at that. Considering he was an immortal, the inn itself should not have any service that can help him. Having said that, there was always. Lex waved his hand, and a cup of midnight signature brew appeared in front of William. This coffee could be strengthened using MP, and since Lex spent 10 million MP on it, it should somewhat be effective. The coffee did not do much. It just helped clear the mind and reduce fatigue for about an hour. But as soon as William took a sip his eyes widened. It seemed he liked it. I'm listening, Lex said, to remind him that he was waiting. Somewhere in his heart, he still disliked William just because they were technically family. The old man hadn't done anything, but something about him just ticked Lex off. Belle's situation was the simplest. She gained a unique bloodline somehow, and has since been trained as a warrior. She fought on behalf of the William family for years, and then directly began working for the Jotun Empire. There was a small incident where she was kidnapped for a short while, but she was returned and even benefited greatly from it. Previously she was participating in the war efforts against the fiery mammoths, but since the incident with Damien, and with the disappearance of Yildirim, she's been too hot-headed to obey orders. She has forcibly claimed the position of family head, and rescued many of the remnants of the William family. You can just tell me where she is. I can find her myself when I need to, Lex said calmly, not letting any of his emotions show. Truthfully speaking, he did not think he could have gotten any angrier after learning what happened to Moon. He was wrong. Although he was drawing a lot of assumptions about Belle's experiences, the truth seemed to be in front of him. But before he met Belle, or Liz, there was something he needed to do. Since they had spent a lot of time with Damien, supposedly, he needed to make sure they weren't brainwashed or being manipulated in some way. But these were not things he would share with William, or anyone else. Well, for what it's worth, Belle may lack in other things, but she was an absolute combat genius. That, combined with her angelic bloodline, has attracted a lot of attention. She has been invited to Ventura Prime as a student, though she has been holding off joining for unknown reasons. And what about Liz? Liz, young Elizabeth. William sighed as he thought about her. She has not gone through any extraordinary difficulty. Or, depending on who you ask, her life has been absolutely chaotic. She has a level of affinity for a cultivation path that had been thought only to be only a legend. A 100% affinity for the Beastmaster path is literally unprecedented. When I heard about it, I thought that Damien would have found her an amazing beast to tame, and helped her cultivate. Instead, he went for another route. Liz went through a lot of training, learning about cultivation, survival, alchemy, formations, arrays, and many more subjects. But the goal was never to turn her into a good cultivator. The goal was to turn her into the ideal wife. For many years, she had been facing numerous wedding proposals that Damien kept on standby, not only because they were not good enough, but also because he wanted your parents to get on board with this plan. At least, that's what he claimed at the time. Chapter 1156 Sand in the Wind. Lex had thought he knew what to expect. He had considered many insidious evils that Damien could enact on his sisters. But of all of them, setting Liz up for marriage was not what he had expected. He wanted to see if she could pass on the affinity, Lex said, accurately guessing his reasoning, or at least his excuse. Yes. For that he was very particular about wanting to find the right match. But at the same time, he really wanted your parents to approve of the marriage as well. The excuse he gave was that he was trying to rebuild bridges and mend their relationship. More realistically speaking, he probably wanted your mother's expertise in ensuring that the offsprings would be geniuses as well. It's good to know that his grandfather was quite dutiful in ticking off all the boxes and being just an all-round scummy guy. Of his sisters, Liz was the most introverted. He supposed constantly getting wedding proposals would make any person antisocial. But besides receiving various proposals from numerous powerful forces, Liz was relatively unbothered. She continued to receive her classes, but for whatever reason, she never actually ended up taming a beast. The reason for that is unknown as of now, because a few years ago Liz ran away from home. At first everyone thought it was just a temper tantrum on her part, until they realized that no one could actually trace her. She had somehow gotten her hands on a piece of treasure that would hide her from any kind of tracking, and then she had run away. To this date, she has never been found. Besides confirming that she is alive, I can provide you with no other information. So Belle was lording over the remnants of the Williams family, and Liz was on the run from wedding proposals. He really didn't want to ask this question, but whenever he avoided things it ended up biting him in the butt, so he asked anyway. They basically didn't even know that they had arrived at the inn. Lex then proceeded to upgrade their bodies and qualifications. Using his physique was far from simple, and Lex had not mastered it completely. But that was fine. The important part was to make it seem incredibly difficult to use, which it was. One by one, Lex touched the candidates on their foreheads, activating his physique. The process was both long and draining on Lex's energy levels, but he eventually completed it. He looked drained, but that was mostly theatrics to drive up the bargain. It was not like he was going to go around announcing that he had secretly elevated the qualifications of every single worker in the last few years. Then people would never stop bugging him. Once that was over, William handed over a file containing all the information he had on Damien to Lex, who not only perused it himself, but sent it to Gerard, Velma, Luther, and Z. Each of them read the files, gathered the information they needed, and began their plan. The Midnight Inn was no longer looking just for Damien. They were also looking for Jeffrey, and the entire terrorist organization behind them. One by one, countless members of the Inn disappeared from the realm, appearing in various planets across the Origin realm. Some appeared in planets that were connected to the Inn, while a large number of them exited from the Midnight Tavern while seeming like regular patrons. They dispersed like grains of sand carried by the wind, and for the first time ever, the Midnight Inn actively extended its influence outside of its own borders. Lex, however, teleported back to Moon, and Z joined him. That was a mistake he almost immediately regretted. Chapter 1157 Cute name. When Lex returned, he was relieved to see that Moon was awake. Harry and Nurse Jubilation were keeping her company as they chatted and he froze. Why were they watching Lover's Island? He recognized the planet on the projection immediately, not to mention that they were following Thaliel, who seemed to be making her way out of a maze of giant mushrooms. Lex coughed to clear his throat. I'm back. Harry, I got the feathers you needed. The trio turned to look towards him and Lex could immediately tell, based on those schadenfreude expressions, that they had probably seen everything. That was fine. Lex had experience with such things. As long as he pretended to just not be embarrassed, they couldn't do anything. Wait a minute. Harry and Jubilation were looking at him, suppressing their giggles, but Moon's gaze was locked slightly to his right. Lex turned and saw that oversized teenager standing right next to him, using his typical neutral expression to hide the fact that he was actually shy. Oh, this is my friend, Z. He's here to help me out with some stuff. Lex didn't want to go into the details of how Z was going to scour the planet, searching for any hidden formations, trackers, spies, or anything of the sort that might have been left behind by Damien. Of course, he wasn't going to do it himself. He would direct those from the Starcloak family to do it. How's her treatment going? I got a lot of feathers, so that should help, right? It's going well. I found out why she was sleeping so much, by the way. The food you fed her went a long way to restoring her physical health. She just needed to sleep more to completely absorb it. Not only is she more energetic because of it now, I believe continuously maintaining such a diet can help her speed up her fusion process. I think you literally just gave her physique the energy to function, and that is taking care of the rest. Lex felt relieved, and was about to comment on how they could ensure her diet was excellent, when Moon reappeared. She was wearing a pure white sundress with floral patterns on it, looking quite adorable. And was she wearing lip gloss? Lex was about to say something when he felt the temperature in the room change. It was very mild, and others might not have been able to feel the temperature rise so lightly, but he noticed the abnormality. Moreover, he could hear the breeze pick up speed outside the palace. Was Moon's mood affecting the planet? Before he could come to a conclusion, Moon already began to lead Z away. So you want to see my planet? I don't mean to brag, I'm kind of considered a saintess here. Let me show this small town nearby. I had the residents train the squirrels to properly garden. It's a lovely sight. No, I just need to check the planet for any dangerous elements. Oh, then I should definitely keep you company. If there's something dangerous on my planet, then I should definitely know about it. Without so much as having a single proper exchange with him, his little sister just left. Was it not long ago that she was continuously just poking his face because she couldn't believe he was here? Now she couldn't even be bothered to acknowledge his existence. He turned to look at Harry and the nurse, but the two just shrugged. Chapter 1158 Proposition. The reason Lex brought Z to the planet was because he was genuinely going to be very busy from now on. Between finding a cure or remedy to Moon's situation, meeting Belle, finding Liz, as well as coordinating the complete and total destruction of his grandfather's entire organization, he was not going to be available. Not only did he want to ensure her security, but he didn't want Moon to be alone anymore. He was planning on slowly introducing her to people from the inn so she got accustomed to them, so that eventually when she went to the inn she wouldn't feel strange. Now, however, he was beginning to doubt his plan. Harry cleared his throat, attracting Lex's attention. It's really not my place to say this, but I think you should let them be. They're kids, and from what I can tell, it's been a long time since Moon had the opportunity to act like a kid, so. Lex's lip twitched. Harry had come a long way from being a barber for some rich kids in New York. Look at him, giving advice about kids to Lex. To think, Lex had brought him on because he just gave a nice haircut. If you need anything else for her treatment, let me know. I'll check in from time to time, but if there's a rush you can just return to the inn and let Mary know. She'll send me word. Harry nodded. Lex hesitated once more. He wanted to go check up on Moon once more, but Z was a responsible kid. They'd be fine, right? It was not like a summer dress was all it would take to completely distract him. With a troubled expression, Lex teleported away. He knew he should have brought Velma here instead. What? A shocked voice asked from inside. I am here to meet Vice Captain Booty of the Iron Pirates, Gerard repeated himself. Please let him know Gerard from the Midnight Inn is here to see him. He will want to see me. The door slammed shut, but only a few seconds later opened up again. An entire gang of wary pirates, holding all sorts of weapons, were revealed. How did you know we're here? Someone asked, but Gerard didn't bother responding. He just stepped into the room. His abrupt behavior startled the pirates, and they began yelling and preparing to fight. But that's what the two followers were for. Shouting and screaming sounded behind him, but Gerard kept an even pace as he walked to the back, where at a table he finally saw Booty, sitting aside an enchanting woman. Vice Captain Booty, we meet again, Gerard said with a warm smile, as if he was looking at an old friend. And you must be Lady Valerie, the true captain of the Iron Heart Pirates. It is a pleasure to meet you. Booty was startled, but Valerie smiled with intrigue. The pleasure is mine. It's not every day I get such a handsome gentleman caller. I must say, whatever this is, I am quite interested to see where it is headed. I wish, Lady Valerie, that this was a social visit, but I come with a task, so the only place this is headed is towards business. I am in need of your unique services. It's not everyone who can run a human pirate crew as a devil. Booty suddenly frowned, and began looking behind Gerard to see if there was anyone else coming. The fact that the Iron Heart Pirates were run by a devil was supposed to be a huge secret. It was not like pirates cared about things like politics between races, but the hatred between humans and devils ran deep. Considering the fact that devils used humans to farm demons, they were not fondly looked upon by other humans. If word got out, then the Iron Heart Pirates would lose many of their connections among their own kind, and be targeted by many. My, such a forward man. If I didn't smell the mark of another devil all over you, I'd think you were flirting with me. Without invitation, Gerard pulled himself a seat and sat down with them. I have a proposition for you, he said calmly. The two other guards who had followed him suddenly appeared at the door and closed it, remaining outside to ensure no one disturbed them. Chapter 1159 An Offer I. While Gerard negotiated a deal with the pirates through guests who had visited the inn before, Velma was off on a small quest of her own. She started off on Vigus Minima, which had flourished over the past few years. It was practically unrecognizable, and the newer generations knew nothing of the zombie apocalypse that had devastated the planet for hundreds of years as a simple story from the history books. The most important thing, however, was that since the planet was far from the main Jotun Empire planet systems and bases to begin with, it had benefited from the investment and guidance of the Empire, but when the Empire was struck by trouble, it was spared. Due to various political realities, and the distance this planet from any of the nearest war zones, it had effectively been spared from even needing to participate in the war. With reduced oversight, the governor of the planet had essentially become a king, though even now he dared not claim that title. After overcoming his Earth immortal tribulation, now as an immortal, not only was he leading the planet to thrive, but his family was also thriving. Delma felt a mild urge to go find Layla, that little girl who used to play back at the inn with Jimmy and the rest. But Velma had other priorities at the moment. Cirque, the first designated pilot of the inn, escorted her to one of the terminals where he summoned the Silent Night, and waited for her to board. From there they took off, shooting towards one of the uninhabited planets in the star system. Calling it uninhabited was a stretch, since all planets that could not sustain life were being used to source rare and valuable minerals, ores, and spirit stones to the 3 Vegas planets. With that in mind, there was technically a colony on all the planets in this system, but that had nothing to do with Velma. With the Silent Night's speed, it only took a short while before they reached the intended planet, before changing course for one of the moons. This particular moon was not being mined because it held no valuable minerals at all, and so had nothing remarkable about it at all. Or so it seemed, for when the ship began to land, it disappeared from sight. "Miss Velma, you have changed since I last saw you. You look more mature. It suits you." "Thank you, I think so too," she said, and flashed a sweet smile. "You haven't changed at all though. I had hoped time would heal some of your pain." Aslan, the mature man with a head full of white hair, only flashed her a remorseful smile. "Time cannot heal all wounds, Miss Velma. To live is to suffer her absence, and to die is to condemn the memory of her to be lost forever from this universe. I do not know which is worse torture." Delma had a great love for love stories, but not all love stories end happily. The man in front of her was a guest who had come to the inn only once, and though that visit was brief, he had shared with Velma his own love story. Truth be told, they did not have too deep of a connection. But since Velma had been considerate enough to listen to him when he had no one else to speak to, he offered her whatever friendship he could. Since he was a friend, even if a distant one, Velma did not really want to use him, but... "Aslan, I have a situation on my hands that I thought you might be interested in hearing about. Would you spare me a few moments?" "Miss Velma, I have nothing but time on my hands. Please join me in the other room so we may sit comfortably." The man led her to a back room which had a lovely view of the back garden and sat down on cushioned floor mats that were placed in the room. He summoned a teapot and poured her some tea before pouring himself some as well. Chapter 1160 An Offer 2. Delma took a sip of her tea. Normally she preferred some sugar or honey in it, but felt that it might be awkward to ask for some, so she gently placed the cup back. "I have a friend," she began. "He's a good fellow. Loyal and trustworthy. A little odd at times, but who isn't? Some time ago, he came to me and a few others asking for help with a delicate situation. Although right now it seems like the situation is under control, I don't know why. When I heard about his problems, I couldn't help but think that if this wasn't handled well, that he may end up joining your family." Aslan, who had been smiling softly up until, suddenly frowned. His light and easy demeanor suddenly changed, and a certain heaviness filled the room. "What's the situation?" he asked. Updated chapters at novelhall.com. His sisters have been targeted by a terrorist organization. Although for now it seems like one of them has been saved, based on what we know, it is unlikely that the terrorists will leave it at that. They surely have an agenda. My friend thinks that they're baiting him into reacting. The thing is, neither will they leave him alone, and nor will he let the terrorists get away with targeting his family to begin with. A clash is inevitable. Up until now, Delma refrained from mentioning details because she did not want to use sympathy to get Aslan's help. "I am not here to ask you for your help," she clarified. "I just couldn't help but think, when I heard about all this, that if you knew about this you wouldn't ignore it. After all, like I said, my friend is a good guy. He has actually walked through fire and fury to aid his friends. If someone like him were to suffer a tragedy. Well, you can guess where I'm going with this. Waging a war against an impossible enemy, alone, and coming out the victor had earned him that right, especially when his enemies had been celestials, not the cultivation realm, but one of the dominant races of the universe. Aslan leaned forward, and began to discuss a few details with Velma, interested to learn more not only about Lex, but about how they planned to face Sanguis Pluvia. Simultaneously, across countless star systems in the Origin realm, members of the Inn were silently meeting hidden and reclusive cultivators who wielded great power and authority. Unknown and unseen to the forces at large, an invisible thread began to connect powers that should have had no interaction ever. Names that had been forgotten in history, or had never been known to begin with, were quietly called upon by the various forces of the Midnight Inn. The only thing that connected all these forces was that, at one point or another, they had visited the Midnight Inn, and the Midnight Newsroom had collected information about them. Lawful and aboveboard organizations made deals within lavish meeting rooms. Dark and dingy corners of the most forsaken lands in the realm witnessed an understanding between unlikely allies. Even deities were not spared from the temptations the Inn offered, as no place else could so readily provide fruits containing divinity. At the same time devils, who were known across the universe for their ability to offer a tempting and irresistible deal to their targets, became targets themselves when they were presented with offers they simply could not refuse. Amidst the chaos that the realm was embroiled in, no one noticed the shift taking place. While all of these deals were being struck, allies being contacted and leads being followed, Luther and John entered a particularly notorious building, the existence of which was famous across the realm. Powell smiled at the two new guests. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" Chapter 1161 Newsroom. "I need a few things," said John, who had long heard of the Infinity Emporium but never had the opportunity to use it. "I need all of these ingredients," he said, slipping a piece of paper to Powell. "I also need a recommendation letter to Hell's Diner, and lastly, I need to teleport my friend and I to the planet Fulcrum." Powell took the slip of paper from John and began reading it, and the more he read it, the bigger his smile became. These were all very rare ores and ingredients used in treasure manufacturing. Alone they may not have cost a significant sum, but this entire list, when considered, was a sizable sum of money. That wasn't even including the other two requests, which were extremely large as well. "Dear guest, your requests are not so easy. It will take a few hours before everything is ready. Would you like to wait here, or come back when everything is prepared?" "We'll wait," said Luther, who was not interested in wasting time. Fulcrum was supposed to be a planet that was virtually inaccessible except through very special means. Teleportation could count as one of those means, only under very specific conditions. The Emporium could, of course, fulfill those conditions. The reason why the planet was so hard to reach was natural and unique, but the thing that was truly important was why they were going there. It was the largest, most renowned black market in the realm. What was the point of a black market that everyone knew about? Why go there if they can shop in the Emporium to begin with? What did all of this have to do with Hell's Diner? The answers were simple. It didn't matter if everyone knew about it if no one could stop or affect the black market, which they couldn't. The things they could buy and sell there could not be sold or bought by the Emporium. Lastly, Hell's Diner had nothing to do with either of those things. While the two continued to think, it was time for their daily check-in with the newsroom, and so they strolled on and peacefully, waving and joking around with the regular guests. The inn really was an amazing place. Finally, once they arrived, one of the rhino centaurs went in first and provided his latest piece of news. The Versailles Bank has just acquired a controlling share in the Undead Private Soldiery, or UPS for short. With that piece of information shared, he stepped out and allowed the other to step in. The Celestial Court has rejected the excuse of outstanding debt for a reason to attack one of its members by the Versailles Bank, and issued a hearing, but the bank representative never showed. Tensions are rising. With that the Rhino Centaur stepped out, his mind still on his own problems. But they remained unaware that the 2 pieces of random information they provided were noted down and added by an important member of the newsroom to an extremely complex and extensive information web, connecting countless various seemingly random bits and pieces of information. Roland, the little boy who once collected news and sold newspapers in the city of Babylon, was one of the most prominent members of the Nixhart family now. His eyes gleamed as he focused on a pin tied to a note that read, Versailles Bank. On that pin were tied countless threads, but one of them led all the way back to the hen alley. He began to scribble something on a notebook. Chapter 1162 Keep Those Flags Coming. Lex finally returned from the Emporium, feeling much better. It turned out that the Celestial Planets Club was exactly who he needed to reach out to. Getting his hands on a spatial treasure that could carry a planet was still out of the question, but he had been looking at the problem all wrong. The celestial immortals who liked carrying their worlds with them clearly didn't put their planets in their pockets, although he suspected that might be possible. Nor did they fly their planets across galaxies. Instead, they tethered the planet to themselves so that when they teleported, the planet traveled with them. It naturally put a burden on the teleportation, but that wasn't a problem for Lex. His system could handle it. Now all he needed was to tether Moon to the planet she was fusing with, which was easier said than done. But that's what the Emporium was good for. Powell worked out a deal and hired someone on his behalf, since he was such a high-value member of the Emporium. Since Lex didn't want any powerful people observing Moon to keep her secret hidden, the hired person would just prepare everything he needed for the tethering and then Lex would do the rest himself. It would take some time, but that should be fine. But his good mood was ruined as soon as he came back. Z and Moon were sitting on a sofa, eating pizza, and watching an anime about a ninja kid. It was a starter anime, and it was an amazing one. Due to the unique circumstances of her life, Moon might have never seen it. It was nice that she was finally getting the opportunity to enjoy her life. The problem was, where the hell were Harry and Jubilation? Why was it just these two, watching the ninja kid's sad backstory? Z naturally noticed Lex's arrival, so he paused the show and very innocently offered Lex some pizza. "Stay safe," said Lex, before teleporting away. He returned to the inn, but from there he was about to buy a ticket to the planet that was, for now, being used as the new home for the William family. That is where his sister would be. After meeting her, Lex also had a very good idea how he was going to find Liz. It was the exact same way he intended on finding Damien. Since they were blood relatives, he would use a spiritual technique to locate those closely related to him. He hoped these things wouldn't take too long. Just as Lex bought the ticket and was about to leave once more, he paused. Someone from the newsroom had sent him a message. He opened the slip and read what it had to say. Finally, a hint of a smile returned to his face. He crumpled the paper, then tore the ticket, teleporting to the planet of Pangea. It was an ocean planet with only a single, massive continent. Finding out that this is where Belle was rebuilding the William family wasn't hard at all, even without the Henali portal. Considering that he was rebuilding ties with his sisters, and knowing that the chances of Belle willingly following him to the inn were nil, he decided to just build a connection to this planet instead of teleporting here from the Emporium. That way he could come to Belle whenever he wanted. Of course, this was under the circumstance that his older sister had not been completely brainwashed and wasn't being controlled by his grandfather through some sinister technique. Or barring some other, unforeseen circumstance, because those just never happened to Lex, right? Shaking his head, Lex lamented his inability to avoid raising flags, not that he believed in such things, and spread out his spirit sense. He had teleported over the ocean, so first he had to find the continent and then look for his sister. But as soon as he spread out his spirit sense, the first thing he saw was a mermaid, and she was mesmerizing. Chapter 1163 Unexpected. It was not that the mermaid was beautiful, but that she was mesmerizing a group of sailors on a ship, causing them to veer their ship towards them. But instead of jagged rocks and a dangerous island, like Lex had heard in stories back on Earth, the mermaids were attracting them towards a sales booth. They were selling deep-sea items, though the usefulness of those items was questionable. After years of practicing with his glyph that could identify treasures, Lex had developed an innate understanding for the value of random objects, and he could tell that nothing they sold was particularly precious. Lex used a simple illusion technique to alter the appearance of his face before teleporting down to the booth. "Excuse me, ladies," Lex said warmly, "could you possibly point me towards the continent? I'm a little lost." The mermaids looked at him, then looked down at their booth. The meaning was simple. Buy something before asking them any questions. Lex gave the items a cursory glance and picked up the most valuable thing on the table, a necklace with a pearl at the end. "How much for this?" "You have a good eye. That's for 30 superior spirit stones." No bargaining. Superior spirit stones were just a type of spirit stones with a higher concentration of spirit energy. They were very widely used by rich cultivators below the immortal realm. Fortunately, Lex had a few thousand lying around in his spatial bangle. He ordinarily didn't bother with these kinds of spirit stones since he directly dealt with spirit crystals, which is what immortals used for cultivation. Lex finally slowed down upon finding a town, and instead of searching for answers in a rush, walked through the town at a casual pace. With his spirit sense extended, he could easily absorb a lot of information around him. He did not expect that he could just go up and ask to see the head of the family, nor did he want to reveal his identity till he was sure of Belle's state. Soon he learned of the details of the new city that the Williams family had built, which would function as their base of operations. One teleport later, he found himself in the city. Lex actually felt slightly nervous upon thinking that he was about to meet Belle. From the moment he decided to meet her again, he had been visualizing their reunion. It had to be perfect. Owing to the number of immortals in this city, he could not just flagrantly blare his spirit sense again, so it actually took him some effort to learn where exactly the family head was supposed to be. Lex was already fantasizing about how he would infiltrate into a secure compound, sneak past all the security undetected, and finally discover the truth about his sister, when he learned some news that gave him pause. Just a few hours ago, in fact probably only a couple of hours before Lex arrived on the planet, Belle had declared that she was giving up her position as family head. That news came as a shock to everyone, especially since everyone knew that she had been aiming for that position for so long. Now, not only had she finally achieved it, but she claimed it completely through her own merit and ended up saving a lot of lives in the process. No one knew what she was thinking. She just gave up the position, declared the next family head, and left the planet. No one knew where she was going or what her intentions were. The news left Lex dumbfounded. He had even gone as far as to try to build a connection to Pangea to the end so that his future travel to this planet would be easier, since if Belle was normal, he might want to come here to see her regularly. But she had just gotten up and left. A wave of denial hit Lex. No, how could he give up? This could be just a ruse. He had to sneak into the family mansion like a spy and find out the details. Chapter 1164. Don't forget. A depressed Lex swirled a drink in his glass aimlessly. He had been sitting in this bar for hours. Last night he had snuck into the William family mansion, and seen for himself that the head of the family had changed. That left Lex feeling a wave of disappointment, but for unexpected reasons. He was not as much disappointed about the fact that Belle wasn't here as much as how easy it was to infiltrate the mansion. Even though there were dozens of Earth immortals there, all Lex had to do was hide inside the thoughts of one of the servants and no one detected him. Moreover, although he saw a bunch of Earth immortals, which was impressive considering that the William family had just suffered a major loss where many of their strongest died, he was disappointed by how weak the family was. Was this it? Was this the powerful and mighty force that had pressured his family? This was the force, in name, which had kidnapped his sisters and held them against their will. Lex was hoping that they would be stronger. That he would be intimidated by them. That they would present as a formidable challenge that he had to be careful around. But honestly, it was not impressive at all. Lex had every bit of confidence that as soon as he became an immortal he could take on this entire family himself, excluding William, who was a heavenly immortal. But considering the fact that he hardly took part in family matters, he didn't count. But to be fair, Lex himself was very strong. Logically he knew it. And logically, he also knew that it wasn't this family who had done everything against him and his siblings, it was his grandfather. But that didn't erase the bitterness. He felt no familial connection to these people, and quite frankly, after testing out cool last names like Dragonsbane and Amore, Lex didn't feel so attached to his own last name either. Maybe one day he'd change it. For now, he just wanted to sulk in this bar. As Lex's domination slowly channeled into the glyph, a projection of the galaxy Lex was in slowly appeared around him, before it began expanding outwards. Lex's energy reserves began to drop rapidly, but he could sustain this for a few minutes. More galaxies appeared around him, and in those galaxies Lex began to detect various pulls. Anyone who was even remotely related to him began to react to this technique, but considering how large the William family was, he wasn't surprised to find out he was technically related to a lot of people across the galaxies. That didn't matter, as he was only looking for specific people. He would know when he found them due to the strength of the pull he would feel. But his energy kept dwindling without any results. Just as Lex began to feel like this attempt would be a failure, he finally got a significantly strong reaction. He couldn't say for certain who the reaction was from, but for the reaction to be strong enough, the relation also had to be close enough. He was certain it was one of his sisters. Now, as he looked at the projection, he just had to find out what galaxy this was, and what planet within that galaxy. Lex, I know you're busy. I just thought I'd remind you that the midnight games are about to begin soon, said Mary suddenly. Oh, don't worry, I haven't forgotten, Lex said as he teleported back to the inn. How could he forget? He planned on using every tool available to him to hunt down Damien and everyone involved. The Midnight Games, organized by the Midnight Inn, was one of the hallmarks of the inn. It would be grand, and so naturally he would use it to set up the board for what he was planning, and gather as much information as possible. Then Lex went to the Emporium. This time he would teleport directly to the planet he had discovered from there since he didn't want to waste time. He could feel that his revenge could not wait for long. Trouble was brewing. Chapter 1165 Cattle. I need to go to this planet, Lex said to Powell, showing him a zoomed-in projection of the galaxy, displaying the planet as well as its nearby star systems. Powell, who was smiling, looked at the projection with a frozen expression, and then at Lex. Then back at the projection. Then at Lex. You know we're a store, right? Not a teleportation facility, Powell said as he rubbed the bridge of his nose. Lex shrugged. Do you at least know the name of the planet? Lex shrugged again. Powell sighed, and then walked to the back room. Lex was certain he'd be able to do it, and he wasn't wrong. Soon enough he found himself once again teleporting through a number of teleportation facilities, since there was no direct teleportation available. Powell also included a VIP security check free access for Lex, so that he could avoid problems with the TSA. He was hoping that this time Lex would not cause an intergalactic incident, though he didn't say that out loud. Lex was too good of a customer to annoy over something as trivial as disrupting the flow of goods and people across an entire galaxy. There may or may not have been hints of sarcasm mixed in when Powell had that thought. Either way, soon Lex found himself teleported to a planet suffering from an artificial ice age. The dominant race of the planet were called the Yeti, and preferred lower temperatures, and so had a deal with an environment conditioning agency that ensured long periods of ice ages on the planet. His parents were nowhere to be found, so he thought it was unlikely it would be them. So what were either Belle or Liz doing this deep into this planet? The level of security, by now, was something Lex could no longer joke about. Even with his stealth suit, and his many means, not to mention his instincts guiding him, he was nearly caught multiple times. Eventually he reached a mountain, covered in snow with the black stone underneath visible in certain areas where the snow had slipped. His connection was coming from within the mountain. Either there was a very convincing illusion formation, or there was a base inside the mountain. He entered his soul state and slowly approached the mountain and carefully went through it. The fact that he was repelled meant that it wasn't a formation. Carefully, so as to not let his building anxiety rush him, Lex entered the mountain, passing through layers and layers of rock until he eventually reached some kind of hidden facility. Lex had kept his spirit sense contained so that it was not detected, which is why he was not prepared for what he saw when he entered. Master, Pell, who had been Lex's silent companion for quite some time, finally spoke. The sword in your eye is returning. But Lex did not care, because it was not the sword hiding in his soul that was causing his anger to bubble. It was the sight of dozens of glass containers in front of him, each carrying an unconscious, naked clone of Moon, floating in some kind of liquid, that was causing the bubbling anger. Master, do not act rashly, said the former dragon trapped in the ring. These clones can be beneficial for your sister. She can absorb them to regain strength. But Lex could not hear Pell's words. His gaze was locked onto a particular Yeti who was standing in front of one of the glass containers, taking voice notes about the growth of the clones, talking about them like he was talking about cattle. Chapter 1166 Strong Prey. We have finally made some significant progress with Clone 117, Joseph talked into his voice recorder. Although we achieved complete basic physical replication with the very first clone, we have failed to replicate any of the unique properties contained within the blood and tissue samples. But with Clone 117, we finally have some progress. Joseph raised one of his fat, hair fingers with only his black nail uncovered by his white hair. He scratched the air with his sharp nail, slowly dragging it down, and a similar cut in a straight line appeared on the clone's abdomen. Blood leaked out of the body, but only for a few seconds, before the wound began to heal. This clone displays limited self-healing ability beyond the norm, similar to that of a high-level cultivator, despite the clone being immortal. Careful attention must be paid to how the clone was nurtured. Worthy of special attention is the fact that this particular clone was replicated using samples from heart tissue, which may be one of the critical reasons why it displays this ability. To confirm, we need to make more clones that underwent the same treatments as 117, but from various other tissue samples. As a final note, the client who approached us recently stated that the original's abilities were not healing, but had more to do with approaching the perfect state, and therefore healing was indirectly a result of that ability. We need to look into this some more. Joseph put the voice recorder away as he watched the cut he placed on the clone's abdomen slowly close. It had been a long time since they had faced a challenge with cloning. Joseph felt something tap on his shoulder, and when he turned around he was stunned. He felt a hand pierce into his body, and beyond it, grabbing onto his very tenets. All the strength in his body suddenly dissipated, preventing him from resisting. He saw brown eyes, though in one he saw a sword, and in the other saw a fiery inferno. One by one, the many protective treasures Joseph had on his body began to activate, and then break. Something deep inside of him panicked, and told him that he immediately needed to activate some kind of panic button, but the thought slipped away from him. His mind began to weaken until he lost the ability to think. But unlike Damien, who hid his tracks well, there was a lead that could be followed for the person who commissioned Clones 4. The situation was becoming complicated. But regardless of how complicated it became, it was best to collect as much information as possible so that they could be prepared for any eventuality. Lex summoned Fenrir. Although he was around 2 decades old now, Fenrir's physiology was still that of a pup, which is likely why he could still not speak. But even so, as soon as the pup arrived in this facility, he woke from his slumber with a start. It was not the teleportation that shocked him, but the connection he felt from his blood. Some feelings and sensations that had overwhelmed him when he was born came back with a fury, and Fenrir was suddenly reminded of the fact that he had a sister. It was something the pup had felt at birth, but because it was too weak, it had forgotten. Perhaps forgetting had been a defense mechanism back then. But right now, he was no longer weak. Just as Fenrir began to growl, and was about to unleash his power, Lex gently laid a hand on his head and calmed him down. "Go look at the situation first," Lex said, his voice completely serene, as if he wasn't furious. "Remember, for strong prey, we cannot let them know we are coming. It is only weak prey that we play with." Fenrir resisted its urge to kill everything within 1,000 miles, and began to follow the blood connection it was feeling coming from within the facility. Meanwhile, Lex turned back to look at Joseph. Indeed, the reason he did not make a mess of this place was because he didn't want anyone to catch on yet. Pell, you once told me about karma techniques. Can you tell me a little more about karma once more? Indeed, the reason he did not make a mess of this place was because he didn't want anyone to catch on yet. Chapter 1167 Bad Taste. Like I said, karma is one of the most mild laws, because it touches everything in existence, yet at the same time it is devastatingly overbearing. Everyone can influence karma, since anything you do carries karma. Yet to forcefully influence existing karma, or to prevent it from forming or influence it into forming prematurely carries a devastating heavy burden. Even as strong as you are, trying to tamper with karma on your own right now will be very dangerous for you. At the very least, you will need a very powerful treasure or formation to carry the burden for you. Lex pursed his lips. He had naturally been looking into the matter of laws, consulting not only Pell, but various guests as well. Through this he finally began to understand some of what things such as destiny and karma really represented. Even among laws there was a hierarchy, and at the moment Lex was only fit to touch the lower or more common laws. I am already here and have sowed karma. How can I thoroughly erase all my traces from here? I mean completely erase, not hide, so that naturally includes karma. Laws are complicated things, and interact with one another in mysterious and unpredictable ways. One way to hide all your traces is to wash this place with divine energy. Divine energy, capable of raising deities to amazing heights through only worship, naturally has many unique traits. Although doing so will make it obvious that someone has hidden all traces here, it will naturally wash over any karma you have with this place. After all, regardless of how strong you are, your cultivation is still low. Lex nodded, and then looked from the Yeti to the floating clones of his sister. Each of the clones was of a different age, ranging from toddler all the way to a late teenager. After going through Joseph's memories, Lex knew well the kinds of experiments that they had in store for these clones, and even thinking about them set his blood on fire. But at the same time, it gave him a new perspective. He always touted the inn as a place to get away from the worries of the universe, but he himself had never faced these worries, so how could he understand what they were? The inn was not just a place with pure energy and exquisite sights. More importantly, it was a safe space. Or at least, that's what it was supposed to be. He no longer paid attention to such minor things anymore, but just a few hours ago some remote civilization that knew nothing of the origin realm or greater powers got their hands on some golden keys. Upon coming to the inn, having limited experience and thinking themselves all-powerful, they naturally tried to take it for themselves. They were naturally dealt with. It barely took a few minutes, and no one from the inn was hurt. But it just went to show that the universe was not a friendly place. Lex, keeping Joseph contained and everyone in the lab suppressed, walked up to the computers and began to pull all the records and data they had saved up. After gathering anything that he felt like might be even remotely useful, he took out his butter knife. The countless cultivators worked tirelessly to rescue all the tourists and locals, and due to the large number of immortals the casualties were brought to a minimum. But in a way, the planet itself had become a casualty. For an untold number of years the planet had been existing in a perpetual ice age, and within the span of a single day it had been covered in vast lakes of lava. Moreover, there was some power at work, keeping the lava hot even when it should have cooled after meeting the ice. Where previously the planet had glaciers the size of entire continents, it now had pools of lava the size of oceans. The Yetis had not become homeless, for there were other planets they could migrate to, but in a single day, they had at least lost one of their homes, but no one could figure out why. Oracles failed to determine the reason, and when more powerful cultivators came and tried to peer into what happened, all they could see was a blade of divine energy, cutting through all causality. Lex, who had returned to the Midnight Inn, cared not a speck for what was going on with the Yetis. He was, instead, thinking of how he would explain this to Moon. It was not like she was a child. She was technically an adult by Earth standards, already in her early 20s. But in his eyes he would forever be that tiny little girl who used to ride on his shoulders and pull his hair. So how would he tell that little girl, how would he explain these clones to her? Hey system. Lex said as he sat in his room, his elbows resting on his knees and his fingers interlocked in front of his face, hiding his eyes. I don't think I've ever probably asked you this, but where do you get all the workers from? All these hundreds of thousands of workers I have summoned, did you just create them, or are they clones of someone? Lex waited for a response, but the system did not respond. It did not even pass a funny or criticizing remark. Just as the silence seemed like it would go on forever, Mary appeared in front of him, a look of deep concern on her face. The inner workings of the system cannot be revealed to you, she said hesitantly. This is not even a matter of authority, it just can't. But, each worker is a genetically modified clone of people who once existed. The genetic modifications refer to the bloodlines you select for them, or the traits you want them to be genetically predisposed towards. But although they are clones, the people they are clones of are all long dead, and do not even have any living members of their lineage either. Lex responded without saying any more. It was not like he would suddenly blame the system for being evil for doing this. He always knew what he was doing. But this cloning business, it suddenly left a bad taste in his mouth. Lex sighed, and then extended his spirit sense to all the clones, then teleported away to Yildirim. Chapter 1168 Tears. When Lex appeared on Yildirim, Moon was jumping on the sofa, screaming and pulling her hair, and Z was just laughing. The same anime from last time was still playing on the television, but now the main character had made an appearance just in time to keep his love interest from dying to a bad guy. On top of that, the main character was coming in from a training arc, so everyone was super excited to see how strong he was. Lex smiled. He remembered when he saw this fight himself. It could only be described as the ultimate hype. Watching Moon lose her mind over it was quite amusing. But Moon, still holding her hair, suddenly turned to look towards Lex with confusion in her eyes. She could feel something, but couldn't understand what it was. It confused her. "Can I see you for a moment?" Lex said. "Alone." Z paused the show and excused himself. Although he could not sense the clones, nor did he extend his spirit sense outwards to check what Lex had brought, he could feel that the mood wasn't right. That left Moon and Lex in the room, awkwardly looking at each other. "What is that?" she asked when Lex didn't speak. "I can feel a strange connection to it." Lex sighed, thinking of various polite or delicate ways in which he could phrase this. But sometimes, a thing did not need to be polite or delicate. Leaving it as cruel or disturbing was what it deserved. "I used a technique to track down my blood relatives to find Liz. I ended up on a snow planet with Yetis. But instead of Liz, I found this." Lex removed the blanket, revealing the faces of the various clones. He waited for a moment to see if Moon had any reaction, but all she showed was a confused expression. Then, suddenly, something clicked in her mind and she showed an expression of realization. "So that's what all of those samples were for," she murmured. Though even now, she didn't look upset, which for some reason upset Lex even more. He had read Joseph's memories before he killed him, and everyone else there. He knew where these tissue samples came from. Even though he himself could revive after taking a ridiculous amount of damage, most people weren't like that. Most people, even cultivators all the way up to the nascent realm, could not just brush away having a part of their brain removed, or having a chunk of their heart cut out. But the nonchalance with which she treated it meant that, much like him, she had been through a lot of pain to the point where it didn't bother him anymore. Lex thought back to that moment he was being burned by dragonfire and was treating the pain like a joke. For some reason, the thought of his sister doing something like that hurt him. A bad mood was no excuse for mismanagement. Lex would thank her for it later. The spaceship has finally agreed to exposure therapy and has started flying over 20 feet in the air. Unfortunately, that means he's constantly blocking light from reaching the plants below him and the gardeners are complaining. Lex sighed and rubbed his eyes. What kind of spaceship was afraid of heights? Tell him he can go to outer space where there is no gravity. That should help. But no matter how Lex tried to get out of managing, Mary would not let him. There was only so much work he could delegate to others. Eventually, several hours later, Lex finally got time to himself again. He returned to his meditation room, and once again employed the technique to search for blood relatives. He was either going to find his sisters, or he was going to find their clones. This was not something he was just about to give up on. But the technique was not easy to use, and required a lot of energy, which slowed down his progress. A few days later, Lex left the inn once more. By now Powell was prepared to help him teleport wherever he wanted, though it didn't help that this time his target was an asteroid belt in the middle of nowhere, far away from any star systems. Since it didn't have a specific teleportation formation on it, they had to get creative, but it wasn't like the vacuum of space bothered Lex by now. Even if they failed, he wouldn't really be hurt. A few days later, he once again showed up on Yildirim, and dropped off a few more clones. The days started to roll by, and the starting date for the Champions tourney kept closing in. After a couple more weeks, Lex finally got his delivery from the Celestial Planets Club, and began the tethering process for the planet and moon, who was looking just a little healthier these days. But, due to her low cultivation level, the tethering process was slowed down drastically. To speed things up, Lex brought dozens or entire spirit stone veins from random, uninhabited planets from nearby star systems over to Yildirim, and had a planetscaping specialist as well as a feng shui master on consultancy for how to speed up the development of the planet itself. He would also, from time to time, bring the corpses of immortal-level beings and bury them in random places on the planet as fertilizer. He even brought a special breed of earthworm over from the Midnight Inn to help speed up the fertilization process. Like that, time slowly passed by, with the spirit energy on Yildirim becoming more abundant and Moon slowly becoming stronger. Since the tethering process was taking much longer than anticipated, Lex also started sending in more workers on the planet so that they would get to know Moon. As for why he didn't bother setting up any protection for the planet, it was because no protection he could buy would be on the same scale as the World Eater, who was lately becoming more and more protective of Yildirim. Lex wasn't exactly sure, but he was starting to think that the World Eater treated Yildirim like a pet. During all this time, Lex never stopped looking for his siblings, but unfortunately never found them, though he found countless Moon clones. That was why Lex felt incredibly reluctant when he had to stop his excursions. But it couldn't be helped. The Midnight Games were about to begin, and next week he would be leaving for the tourney. Chapter 1169 Monsieur Beast. There was one more reason Lex stopped going after clones. In his last 2 excursions, the security had been amped up a lot. It was not that Lex was afraid of them, but that with the tourney so close, he didn't want to risk anything. Just a little more time and he could face his tribulation, and then there would be nothing that could stop him. But until that happened, Lex had to put a stop to his hunting. Speaking of hunting, Lex looked towards Fenrir and Little Blue. The cute little whale had grown up, and somehow become even cuter. Now it just looked like an oversized baby whale with angel wings. FOLL0W current novels on n/o/v/3l/b in co/m. Although Kuan Pungs, which is what Little Blue was evolving into, were legendary beings of absolute and unquestionable power, that did not exclude them from being cute. That made it hard for Lex to believe that Kuan Pungs were apparently so strong that they were the primary hunters of dragons, at least until Fenrir brought Little Blue out with it to hunt. Fenrir had formed its own pack, even though none of its pack members were wolves, and had power over them. So whenever Lex encountered clones of Fenrir, the pup would summon its pack. Little Blue and Zen, the small patch of sentient grass that was also an earth immortal, were both in his pack, alongside a rainbow-colored peacock, a magic carpet that evolved differently from the rest of its group, a bunny, and a butterfly. The pack was quite comedic in his opinion. But he was proved wrong when he saw Little Blue's power. Honestly, it put Fenrir, the pack leader, to shame. If dragon's might was a representation of a dragon's pride, then the force which erupted from its body when it spread its wings with powerful intent was a representation of its magnificence. Suffice to say, the little guy could take care of himself now. It was so much so that Lex included Fenrir and his pack in his plans for Sandwest Pluvia. "Lex, the president of New Earth is here again," Mary said, causing Lex to sigh. This guy was so persistent. The most annoying thing was that he actually wasn't interested in meeting the Innkeeper, and specifically wanted to meet Lex. Over the past few years, New Earth has really flourished. After we overcome the loss we all endured, we could finally focus on building the future. With the arrival of our newer generations, who have never even seen Earth, building up the future became even more important, so that it would be a good one. I think it's not too vain of me to admit that we've done a good job, and though a lot of that has to do with us, I think a lot of that has to do with you as well. Me? Lex asked, surprised. Yes, of course. The Innkeeper and the Midnight Inn offered us a place to live and survive, but Earth is not the only planet that has suffered such tremendous loss, but it is the only one that has received overt help the way we did. Everyone realized it, and after a while, everyone came to realize that it had to be because of you. Who else could influence the Innkeeper enough to get him to offer us help? We've talked to Harry. He's from Earth and he's a nice guy, but even he knows he does not have that kind of influence. So what are you proposing? Lex asked after a while. Well, to be entirely honest, we're not sure how we can help. But recently, more and more of our people have been trying to get a job at the Midnight Inn. Although we've had little success so far, with the inn reopening, I think it will start hiring again. After all, not so long ago the inn took in those elves. All I want you to know is that if they start getting hired, the people of Earth stand behind you. We've heard rumors that you haven't joined any of the houses of midnight. Well, if you want to start your own house, then we will support you. Lex said nothing, and studied James' face for a moment. The man had imagined so much drama on his own, but then again, maybe from an outsider's view, this is what it seemed like. Lex could no longer deny that he was one of the most well-known members of the inn, especially after everyone started to guess that the name on top of the guest registry was his. That naturally bred speculation, and now accompanied his newfound infamy as a wanted man, as well as fame for being the most wanted husband among angels. It made sense that people would speculate about him. Once Lex left a trail of breadcrumbs for people to follow to explain why he spent so much time at the inn. Now it seemed like he would need to start another trail of breadcrumbs for why he was so influential at the inn. Thanks for your support, said Lex. Now you should really focus on the midnight games. They're about to kick off. With those final words, Lex disappeared. Chapter 1170 Negotiations. Lex reappeared inside a small conference room within the inn, where two humans, an orc, a devil, and an angel were sitting, chatting amongst themselves. Originally he hadn't planned on having a meeting with all of them at the same time, but time constraints and a few logistical issues made it so that all of them ended up arriving close to one another. Sorry for being late, Lex said politely as he grabbed a seat. I hope you all had a pleasant chat. The orc looked at Lex and very blatantly probed him with his spirit sense. From what Lex knew, they were a very warlike race and lacked subtlety, which is why one needed a certain level of strength to have a discussion with them. Otherwise they would not deem you worthy of even having a conversation. Lex was not bothered, and only revealed a hint of his domination. Right now, all Lex needed to do was show him that he was not weak. He did not need to show him the extent of his power. The orc grunted with approval before saying, It is not often I see devils and angels sitting together on the same table. You are a bold one. Not at all, Lex said casually. I just believe that we can all benefit from working with one another. Before we begin, said one of the humans, I must inform you of some of our rules. Before agreeing to the task, the parameters need to be clearly defined. If you want us to do anything extra, then that will require additional payment. Moreover, the Reaving Dread is a very popular mercenary group, which means that there is a chance that your opponent may have also hired some of our people. Just know that the Reaving Dread mercenary group will never fight its own people. If both sides have members of the group, then instead of a direct clash, the orders will need to be changed. The orc and the humans didn't care about that, but the devil and angel were perturbed. How can I agree to anything unless I know the details? What if you want us to attack our allies? Or there is some conflict of interest? This is our first time cooperating, so of course there is a deficit of trust, Lex said very calmly. I can share the details with you, but for that we would have to go to the Chamber of Secrets. You can decide then if you find it agreeable, but then the details will be wiped from your memory when you leave. You will only remember whether you chose to agree or not. I believe this is a lot more secure than other conventional ways of sharing secrets. Indeed, simply wiping memories was much simpler than making solos or being bound to contracts which would result in devastating damage or repercussions if the agreement was breached. They contemplated for a moment, but saw no drawbacks to the suggestion. The orc and humans, though, once again, did not care. It was pretty much determined that they would be hired as long as their stipulations were kept in mind. The group then ventured into the Chamber of Secrets, and Lex began to reveal some of the basics of what their agreement would entail. Even with the chamber in play, Lex kept most of his plan a secret, but he did divulge who and what they would be targeting and what would be expected from them. Of course, Lex also detailed what benefits they gained to stand by agreeing to work with him. The angel was very good at masking her emotions, showing nothing of what she actually thought, though Lex could still read her. The devil, on the other hand, was visibly excited. The more Lex talked, the wider his smile became, and it was almost like he couldn't restrain himself. That wasn't really a good thing, for him at least, because when it came to negotiating his pay, Lex knew he could push hard. The angel, on the other hand, presented a much tougher front when it came to negotiations. Of course, that was only what she thought. Lex could read her like an open book. It also helped that he knew exactly what the angels wanted from him. They could have gotten treatment for their wings from the inn anyway, but Lex didn't mind upselling his treatments in exchange for more of their favor.